Hello there, I'm Guildmaster Dan, and welcome to the Fourth Wall. It's been a couple of weeks since I last did something, but I'm back now, and excuse me for a second. This week, we're talking about mind control. Come here! I've spoken previously about how you should never take control away from your player. They have absolute authority over their character. They're going to play them as they choose to. They just have to deal with the consequences of how they choose to play them. You should never take control away from that player in order to fix them. Now, that being said, there are abilities in games that deal with mind control. They might come across an evil wizard or psychic or something that'll dominate their mind and make them do things. Well, there's multiple methods of how to handle that in order to prevent yourself from taking too much away from the player. For example, the first and most direct control that most people tend to see is assuming direct control of a PC. That's where you tell the group and you describe how that player starts acting and saying things. You speak for them. You treat them just like another NPC, and they start doing whatever the mind controller wants them to do. Now, this is the most blatant method. It's the most effective method. It just gets the job done. However, it is better used for quick instances, like nothing that lasts longer than a few minutes, because it forces the player that is associated with that character to sit there and wait until you're done. Now, done in short instances, that's fine. Players are used to sitting there while other players do their thing, and wait their turn. But, when you're controlling their character, it feels invasive. It should, because what the evil character is doing to them is invasive and is terrible and evil. But, on the player GM level, you need to understand that them sitting there is not fun, takes away from the game. You don't want to use that method for things that last longer than a few minutes. Now, something similar to that, another method that works better in horror games, is removing the player from the group. Now, what I mean by that is, if the method of mind control in the game doesn't leave the character with any memories of what happened while they were under the influence, what you do is you can remove the player from the room. Ask the player to go stand, out in the hall or something. And then describe, just like before, what the character does and says, and so on. This can be the most unsettling method, because when that player comes back, and suddenly comes back into it, has no idea what they did, and has to deal with the repercussions of what the character did in the absence of their control. Essentially, you're making it a little bit more authentic by removing the player's control, by removing them from the room. Now, again, works better in short instances, because they're sitting over there, and now they're away from the group, so they're really sitting there doing nothing. So you don't want to make that last a super long period of time. Nothing more than a few minutes. But that can be a very unsettling thing to do, particularly in a horror game when people are losing control. That works great. I've used that method before in my SCP game a little while back. Now, granted, in that case, everybody in the party was under the influence, and then one session they're doing something, and then all of a sudden they're in a different place in time. And I don't mean far in the future. No, I don't mean time travel. I mean it was nighttime where they were, and now all of a sudden they were sitting around in a room at nighttime, and now the next second, as soon as they blink, they're in a car driving in the morning. What happened? And then they had to go and figure it out and kind of piece together what they must have been doing in the down. And it was really creepy and unsettling. it could be like that for a single player, but you can't. You got to be aware that you're forcing that person to sit away from everyone for whatever period of time that you're running this. So don't do it for more than a few minutes. Now those are the most direct and most effective routes. Probably my favorite is best used for long instances of mind control, such as maybe they're being possessed by a spirit or something, and they're going to have it for a while. Is including the player. Taking the player who's become possessed or who's had their mind dominated and pull them aside. Pull them aside or give them a note, depending upon how slyly you want to do it. Explain to them, how their mind, explain to them what's happening, how their mind has been altered, or their perception, because there's actually multiple ways to do this. You can either flat out tell the player, your mind's being controlled, this is the effect that the controller is forcing you to do, or you can do it even more subtly, where you tell them you just change the player's perception. Like if the mind controller's goal is to get them to attack their team members, you could tell them that they see their team members as, monsters. Or even more subtly, they no longer trust their team members because they perceive them doing something. This is the most subtle route, but it is by far it's by far the most fun for the player involved. Essentially, you're including the player in what's happening in the story by bringing them in, telling them what the mind control is doing, and letting them role play it out. It can be very unsettling for the other players because now the player who has up to this point played their character a certain way is now all of a sudden playing their character a completely different sort of way, and it's going to be very unsettling to the other players and characters. Now, the more subtly you can do that, the more effect it'll have on everybody. But that is the best method, I feel, because it's inclusive. The player isn't off sitting on his own, doing nothing, doesn't have to wait, and the player's still doing it. Now, granted, the character probably will not be happy that they're being controlled, and the player could be unhappy about that too, which kind of brings me to the point that you need to be aware of what sort of player that you're doing this with. You need a good role player for this to work. It will not work on people who are not strong role players because they'll just start slipping back into what they're used to doing, and it won't work well with metagamers. Remember, metagamers play for the most effective strategy to win, and when you give them control of role-playing out this mind control method, their most effective way to win is to subvert the entire thing and not play it out to what it's supposed to be. So be aware of your player, but if you do have a good player, a good role player, someone who will go along with this, it can be very fun for them to play their character differently, and also very unsettling for everyone else, and very cool, and it's just generally all around the best route, I feel, to carry it out, because it is inclusive of the player and doesn't force them out of the game. Now, as for again, even though this works good for extended mind control, like few sessions, few days, maybe even an entire adventure. If it comes down to a long haul mind control, like rest of their lives or for years of their lives, it's best to just treat it like a character death. If they're dominated and they're not going to have control of their character for possibly years, because either the domination is just above their level of resisting or breaking, or the effect of the mind control is to take them away from the party, often by themselves for an undetermined period of time. Just treat it like a character death. Take the character away from the player, have them make a new one so they can continue playing as a new character, but then go on and describe the actions of that character. Whether they keep running with the group, only they act differently now, or they've gone off to do their own thing. Take it away from the character. Know what that character's off doing, because you're not doing that for no reason, which I'll touch on again in a second. But if it's going to be a long haul and they're not going to be able to break that mind control for a long period of time, or if that character's going away because of the mind control, just treat it like a character death. Take the character away from the player, have them make a new character to play. Now, if during that time, over a period of time, they manage to free that character of the mind control, either through, some high-level spell or psychic ability or something, or, I don't know, something in story happens that, has it fall away. Maybe the controller died or something. You could revert the control of that character back to the player. All of a sudden, boom, you have control again. And it can be just as effective. Keep in mind whether or not that player will be able to play multiple characters in your game. They might have to choose which one they want to run with, but ultimately, in that sort of case, you want to treat it with the long haul. The thing about mind control is, just like before, how I said you should never take control away from the character. The reason being is it's very invasive. The character is who they are in this world. And when you take control away, you are being invasive. Like, mind control is an evil act, regardless of what it's used for, because you are taking away the will of someone else. You are subjugating them mentally. And when you do that, when you use that as a game master, it's just as invasive. The only difference is that you're the world. You have to control the bad guys. If the bad guys would use that to their advantage, they will, and they should. But you need to be aware of how invasive that is and use it appropriately. Mind control should be used in short instances unless, you're going to treat it as a character death, and should be played up for effect. Let the player play up how invasive it is and how their character, how much it hurts them, it bothers them to know that they had their control taken away. Make it a role-playing experience. Remember, this is a role-playing game, and when you're taking that control away, that invasive experience is perfect role-playing material. Let it be that. Use it in short bursts for effect, or use it as a character death. That being said, never use it as a means to fix a problem player. Never. If their character is causing problems in a group, that will either fix itself out in the group by the group leaving that character behind or killing that character, and then they have to make a new character. But you should never use it to fix a character. That problem players is an out-of-game problem, and they need an adult conversation. They don't need an in-game fix for their behavior. They need an adult conversation so that they can fix their behavior. If they don't want to, as I've said many times before, if they don't want to fix their behavior, they don't have to play your game. Don't use mind control to try and fix their problem behavior, because it won't. It'll just make it worse. But that being said, mind control can be a very cool thing to introduce in your game. Works great in horror games when people start losing control of themselves and have to deal with the repercussions of that. It can be a very fun role-playing experience, and it can be great for character development. But it needs to be used appropriately, because it is invasive, and should be used as such. Treated as such. Now, there's multiple ways to handle mind control, and maybe there was a method that I didn't mention here that's worked well for you. Or maybe I said something that you disagreed with. In either case, feel free to leave a comment below. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Hi there guys, Guildmaster Dan again with a quick announcement for you. In conjunction with Undercity Games on RPG Now, I have a new RPG sourcebook out by the name of Gideon's Lost Arcology's Lords of Littleworld. It's the first entry in a series of source books that'll cover unconventional races. This first one, Lords of Littleworld, covers minuscule races, essentially playable character races, or races that can be encountered that can fit in the palm of a medium-sized character's hand. And this book contains everything you need to know to either play that race or incorporate them into your game as an encounter. Covers their culture, covers their physiology, covers their day-to-day lives, such as courtship and how they dress even. Everything you need to know to incorporate one of these characters. That being said, in this book, I purposely left out their history and their religion. That way, if somebody wanted to incorporate them into their world, they can very easily fill in the history and, the appropriate gods to them. That being said, please check it out. I'll have a link below, and maybe I'll do another video as a bit of a preview for it in the future. But for now, please check it out, and we'll see you guys later.